Welcome to Friday night's video in our second master series. I do believe this is the 60th video in our second master series, the 8th video or 9th video on basic processors, and the 8th video on equalization. In this video, we are going to talk about the basic meat and potato parameters of our most important equalizer, which may sound funny, but this equalizer is you master this equalizer and master using it well with the things we've talked about in the first master series and then the second master series, that you're well on your way to being a good master audio engineer. Now the parameters on this equalizer are pretty basic. So we're just going to kind of go over them, and we're going to talk about the meat and potatoes ones that are going to be most important to you. Now, your equalizer may have other bells and whistles and things that it does that's great. But understand what they do, understand their purpose, understand what the manual's telling you what they do, and then test them well and find out where they can be applicable in your production and something that's actually useful to you, and make sure that they are, or ignore them. So just kind of keep that in mind. Now, first of all, your spectrum, if we look on the videos we talked about looking at the spectrometer, that your equalizer may give you different ways to view the audio, to where you may be able to see it in third octave or waterfall or all kinds of different ways. But I focus on the FFT curve myself. This is a line graph, and it's going to give you the best detail to do most of your work. So I normally focus on this, and it's my most important visualization on any of my equalizers, and I recommend you kind of stick with that. Second of all, that you have a couple options to where you're fussing around with things with your equalization, that you have some kind of option that's just showing you the one it's working on, the actual curve in green there, that's showing you what it's doing, and then it's showing you in white what is actually happening. And it can sometimes invariably show you what they all are doing and what is actually happening with the audio from their input and their application into whatever you're working on, which can be helpful also. So those are very simple concepts and very simple ideas that can help you to visualize what's going on. Now, basically, the most important meat and potatoes things we're looking at when we're looking at our equalizer is we're looking at the spectrum and decibel levels. So it's going to go from 20 up to normally 20 kilohertz, 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz. And it's going to go in intervals that are pretty easy to count up. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 1,000, 1 kilohertz, 2,000 kilohertz, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, up to 20. There's 10, 15, and 20. So that's pretty simple, and decibel levels to show you how much you're attenuating and boosting, and what the piece of music or piece of audio you're working on is showing you, and how much you're attenuating that. It's showing you that there, and you can also see the difference of what it looks like from whatever you applied. So these are pretty simple concepts. There's nothing real extraordinary about that. It's in your usage mostly. So the first things we come to that when we're dealing with our meat and potatoes equalizer is we've got a high cut or a low pass filter, or a low cut and a high pass filter. Now these have a couple parameters. Normally you have a center frequency, and you're going to set this for center frequency. Let's say I set it at 100 hertz. Well, if you look at it here in red, it's sitting at 100 hertz, but the slope is actually going past that. And depending on where I set the slope, how much it's actually going past that center frequency I set. So you really want to keep an eye on that. Understand that it's happening, that you've got the center frequency on either side of it. You're actually getting attenuation or boost or attenuation with these cut filters. Now, the concept here, the biggest concept here is that you've got decibels per octave that it's going to drop. 12 dB per octave, 24 dB per octave, 36 dB per octave, which basically works out to a slope that's fairly visual, that's going to start out from a center frequency that's going to drop so many dB per octave, and then it's going to slope off of that back up to normalization where the line started from, which is debatable, and you want to test to see exactly what it's doing, because it will have an impact to what's happening. Just because you see it doing that does not mean that's exactly what it's doing. We talked about that in the last video, and you want to have a better idea of what exactly it is doing. But that's the purpose of it. And then the high cut low pass filter does the exact same thing. The difference between this is that we know we have to deal with the upper end a little more delicately. So sometimes I'll put equalizers in series because I might have a high cut filter up here that's doing a serious cut up here at say 15, 16 kilohertz that I've got a serious slope, but I also want to have a gradual slope to attenuate some of these. So I'm going to have another EQ on there afterwards with another high cut filter on there that's going to come in there, and it's going to have a nice gradual slope on it to help attenuate some of these other things that are going on if I want sloping. If I'm not using one of these other applications or one of these other things like a shelf filter. So these are pretty simple parameters, and it's not nothing extraordinary. It's just an explanation of it, that these are your meat and potato parameters you have to work with. Next are things like shelf EQ. We have a shelf EQ. Let's say I'm dealing with this here, and let's say that I've put my low pass filter on there, and from here, or my high cut low pass filter, and I want to bring this in on top of it, because I might have something like this going on to where I've got a serious cut over here at 18 kilohertz for some reason. And then I want to bring this shelf filter in here, from here, that's supposedly is going to cause a combination of a couple things, because for the most part, what happens on a shelf filter is you have a center frequency. It's going to slope off that down farther or up farther depending on what you're using, the low pass or low shelf filter or a high shelf filter, attenuating or boosting, and then you're going to have that slope again. You're going to have that 6 dB slope, 12 dB slope, and you can see the slope increase as I increase that, depending on how much you want that to happen. But the concept is that it should level out, and then you have a flat slope, so you're attenuating or boosting a very wide range of frequencies that flatten out, that eventually slope down to the normalization that you started out with. It's a pretty simple concept, and there's not anything much complicated about it. The next thing we come to is we're dealing with, in both of these, a lot of times you can have the option to make them peaking also, rather than just shelf. Now, these other ones that we're looking at, like say this one here, this is a peak. This is a peak node. This node is only going to allow peak. It's not going to allow shelf or cut or anything like that. And it's the most fundamental application that we use, or filter, because what you have is some type of a bell shape that centers on some frequency that everything culminates to, and a certain band of frequencies that you can widen or narrow with what they call a Q. So this concept, it can get very complicated, and we've talked about, the tools that we have in music production sometimes are very simple tools, and we're dealing with complicated things, but we get pretty simple tools a lot of times because we kind of, they're not going to build a $50,000 equalizer for your DAW. You're going to have to buy a $50,000 equalizer. It's probably not going to come with your DAW. So, but these are simple tools that, you've got a center frequency that should be pretty accurate. You've got a gain that you can set how much you're attenuating and boosting, and then you can broaden the band of frequencies that you're trying to affect. And sometimes, let's say that you have a couple of them and it's not working exactly how you want because of the shape. And so using them in conjunction can be very helpful, because when you start using them in conjunction, you can set up two of them working together to try to affect the audio in a certain area or a different band, like I've just done right there. So this is a really good, how should I say, argument for using these in series, because unless you have lots and lots of bands or in, unlimited amount of bands that you can affect, that, using them in series, I'll do my low cut, high cut filtering with one EQ. Then I might do my shell fill EQ work on it with a different EQ, and then I might do my other EQ work with this EQ, with another EQ, because I can have them all at peak if I need to do that much work. I've got 5 bands that I can deal with, which is more than likely more than enough to get done what I want to do in most situations. So, the basic parameters we're looking at here are pretty simple, and what they're doing is pretty simple. And we talked about in the last video, the biggest thing is how well are they doing that, so you can take that into consideration to do a good job. And the next thing we've got, like some kind of gain. The better you get as an engineer, this is makeup gain. So if you've attenuated things a lot and you want to boost them back up, very easy to boost them up. Or if you've boosted them a lot and you want to attenuate it down a little bit overall for the output, that it's very easy to do from here. As a master audio engineer, you will find yourself using this knob more than something like auto adjust. Auto adjust, you want to read in your manual exactly what it is doing, because it's debatable whether it's trying to find a mean or a peaking level or something like that, and then test it with your level meters to see exactly what it's doing. Now, besides that, the only other parameter that's really important, that's one of your meat and potatoes parameters, is a wet and dry parameter. So if you don't have one on your equalizer, like I don't have one on this equalizer, setting up, I can do this in my DAW with other tools in my DAW that can actually allow me to set up a wet and dry effect. Because let's say that I've gone 40% of the Equalizers contour and I've fussed with it and it sounds pretty good. It just needs to be off just a little bit. Instead of fussing with all these nodes, I might go to my wet and dry control and tone down, go a little more dry on it, or go a little bit more wet on it, to really super fine tune the amount. Because depending on how picky you are, I'm really picky. In some situations, I let stuff fly. I'm like, no, that's fine. Just the way that is, that's going to sound great in the mix. And sometimes I'm not. Sometimes I'm sitting there going, 1 dB, one little bit more wet. Yep, right there. All right, yeah. And I walk away and come back and listen to it, and A-B it back and forth. And sometimes I'm like that, sometimes I'm not, depending on the production, depending on the application, depending on where I'm working on. And that's my opinion. So you're going to have an opinion. We talked about your opinion, and that's very important. And your opinion will probably be a little bit different, which is great. That makes you, you, and me, and then me, and you are doing some audio engineering, making some cool music. So anyway, these are the basic meat and potatoes, parameters and things we want to focus on, and more times than not, your equalizer should have something saving presets. You really want to be able to save presets, like we talked about with Equalizers contour, starting points, or things you've equalized in the past, some vocal or and naming and saving presets of those is very important. Side chaining is another thing. Being able to side chain things into your equalizer, so that you may or may not be working with just one track or one group, and being able to use it in that way, and really understanding the side chain capabilities of being able to route other things into the equalizer as you're functioning is something you're going to really want to take a look at, and its abilities as far as your equalizer is concerned, and you have, which is going to take a little bit of reading on your part. So I hope that made that really simple, because if you can master these parameters and really understand what's happening there and test them well, so that you can understand what's happening with them well, so you can have a really good understanding of what's happening whenever you adjust any of them, that these are going to be the meat and potato things that are going to be of utmost importance to you, and you becoming that next level master audio engineer. And these basic things we talked about are not that complicated, and I tried to keep them as simple as possible so that the relation is easy, so that you can begin testing and experimenting with them and understanding what you're dealing with. And what you're dealing with is fairly simple, and it's a pretty simple processor, and the complication comes in you perfecting your use of it. So peace, soap, love. I certainly hope you enjoyed this video on our parameters, and I will see you in the next video.